Alright, now we're going to start with a side step to the left on 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, and go. To the right, to the left, here we go, to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left. Now slide, 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 slide. Now cross in front. Cross in front. Cross in front. Cross in front. Now cross in the back. Cross in the back. Cross in the back. Cross in the back. Now freestyle.
Alright, you may all take a seat.
I need a freestyle with you.
Alright, so if you haven't guessed yet, we are doing movement. The central question we came up with are how are movement and learning related? Alright, so here's the wheel of multiple intelligences, and bodily kinesthetic is where we are, so learn by doing, learn by moving. The learning target that we came up with is I can use movement to engage and empower my students. Alright, so here we have a chart of the old way of thinking. It says cognition, emotions, and movement are all separated. They're not connected. And that's not what people think today. Here's the new model. So emotions affect movement, which affect cognition. So everything's related. All right, benefits of movement in the classroom. Why do we move in the classroom? When you move in the classroom, your brain gets oxygen, which fuels the brain, and then connections between neurons increase. So movement in the classroom improves brain function, concentration, memory, mood, and critical thinking skills. So I'm going to show you how to use movement as a formative assessment. Remember, formative assessment is to find out where your students are in the learning process. So I'm going to use a game of Simon Says. So I need everyone to stand up again. And if you don't remember the rules of Simon Says, if I don't say Simon Says, then don't do it. All right? So I'm pretending that we're in an 8th grade history classroom. And you guys are all African Americans during the 1950s. All right, so the beginning of the class, I talked about Jim Crow laws. And now at the end of the class, we're going to do a formative assessment, or you can do this as a hook the next day. All right? So instead of Simon Says, I'm going to be saying Uncle Sam Says. So Uncle Sam says, raise your right hand if you had to sit on the back of the bus. Uncle Sam says, touch your head if your grandparents/ancestors were enslaved. Touch your nose if you've been legally banned from voting. All right, everyone touch your nose now. You need to listen. All right, Uncle Sam says, take one step to the right if you had to sit in a separate section of a restaurant. Uncle Sam says, take one step back if you have to attend separate church than whites. And touch your ear if you had to use public bathrooms marked for colored only. All right, everyone who touched their ears out. All right, that is the end of our quick Simon Says game. But as a teacher, I'll be able to assess what my students know. So that's a fun way to use movement as a formative assessment.
All right. So as you can see, we're going to get physical today. What I'll be talking about is brain rule number 1 from Dr. John Medina, of which there are 12. He talks about how aerobic exercise specifically boosts executive function, things like problem solving, planning, and attentional tasks. And I believe whether we're elementary or secondary, attention is a very important concept in the classroom. And especially for elementary, sometimes I think the kids need to get up and bounce is very apparent. So a couple of things that I would potentially suggest is having stand-up desks or having children sit on exercise balls. Dr. John Medina also talks about treadmills. He talks about this in work or in school. So we'll be doing another quick dance routine. If you'd like to all stand up, please. It'll be about 30 seconds. You haven't seen this video? It's fabulous. So a lot of it's just, yeah. Yes, please.
I just ate about.
Oh.
Jesus.
And then you can freestyle again if you want. You can do the body. Thank you.
I miss the 80s. So now that you're all ramped up and moving, oh,
So, differentiation is an important way to make sure the success of all our students happens in the classroom. And we can use movement to do that. One group that we're going to be differentiating for a lot are ESL students. And when there's a language barrier, and there's a mental block there, sorry, I'm moving around a lot. We can use movement, which is a more universal language, to cover that language barrier. And from an article I read by a CSU professor, most ESL students strongly preferred kinesthetic learning as a major learning style, particularly Arabic, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Thai speakers. There's also another teacher, well, I forgot her name, but she did a thing with dancing and math with girls after school. And what they did was they used the variables of math, like X, Y, and Z, and they replaced them with like dance moves. Like a twirl would be X, or a jump would be Y. And then they would work out the math problems by using these variables and moving around. And she said this in her article that I read: because movement allows a student an alternative approach to the information, it can help put students in the receptive state required for learning. This breaching of the mental barriers is especially significant for young women, who are more likely to self-limit their abilities because of their social stigma associated with mathematics. The two things I want to highlight there are putting the students in the receptive state and breaching of the mental barriers. I think those are the two main parts of differentiation, the foundations of it. So when you're backwards designing your lesson plans, try to think of some ways you can put movement in. Things like dramatic interpretation, interpretive dance, pantomime. They're all great ways to get those active kids away to use their physical prowess.
and now to help you bring that energy, that nervousness maybe, we need to bring it down a little bit. The idea here is with a bit of a mindfulness practice. So if you were at the front of your class, you tell your class after they came in from a class change, stop, everybody sit down. Let's start thinking, let's get busy, let's take an exam. Now, without teaching them how to stop and think, how are they gonna know how to do that? So what we wanna do is teach them to pay attention to their bodies and their minds. So getting our thinking into the frontal lobe, where that higher order thinking, the reasoning is. So how are we going to do that? What I'd like you to do is join me in a bit of an activity where if you can put both feet on the ground and have your hands on your lap or somewhere relaxed. Don't do this, please. And now the idea here is we're going to stimulate our vagus nerve. Now that's the nerve that's called the inner eye. It's called the wandering nerve. Vagus is in Latin. And we stimulate that by breathing. So what we're going to do together is breathe, but breathe conscientiously. Pranayama is the Sanskrit word for that. So I want everybody to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Now, the next time you breathe in, hold it for a count of 1. And now breathe out and hold it for a count of 2 before you inhale. All right, again, let's do this 4 more times together, but each time, try to stretch it out even more. Now, what you may be noticing is a calming effect. It's going to help you continue breathing now. It's going to help you think. It's going to help you process. It's going to help you reason for these presentations that are coming up that are going to give us loads of helpful information. So 3 more breaths like that. Let's do it together. And hold at the top, and hold at the bottom. And just this simple act of breathing and thinking about your breath, filling your chest, stretching out your nervous system. With practice, it's going to give you the ability to calm your classroom, to build community too, because as you exhale, this life-giving air goes out and builds a community. When you inhale, fill your heart, and exhale. Thank you for participating.